Welcome to Q&A with, a show where I focus on the role behind the person to give you some insight into how to operate in their world.
My name's Shaun Flores. I'm a freelance journalist. I also do podcasts and political and social commentary, and I'm also a mental health advocate and public speaker. So yeah, that's the best way to describe it. I'm in the creative communication realm.
That's quite a mouthful there that you're doing.
Multidisciplinary.
Yeah, it's quite a lot, but we're going to interview you as a freelance journalist, so I appreciate you coming down for that. So what exactly is the role of a journalist?
The role of a journalist is to report stories and to tell stories that are in the public interest. And those stories that are in the public interest are either a threat to society or stories that we need to hear more in society, such as politics, could be show business, but there's different types of journalism. So I focus mainly on political and social journalism. So I write quite a lot of articles about mental health, especially living with OCD and what we can do to improve mental health provisions and facilities to give people a chance at being able to fully function in society. There's also showbiz journalism. There's celebrity journalism. I think that would be classed under the same bracket. But I would say for the most part, a journalist is to report stories that are within the public interest and to challenge institutions actually as well. So the freelance element of my role allows me to work for myself. I'm my own boss. I can pitch certain ideas. So essentially it gives me the freedom to answer to nobody except myself. I'm not bound by any rules or laws except the journalistic rules and laws. And I quite enjoy it that way compared to if I worked for a newspaper or a magazine. I would have to write things in a certain kind of way. But there's also things I'm also probably not allowed to say that would be outside of my remit. So yeah.
So what are these journalistic laws and policies that you have to follow, and what is out your remit?
So there's like code of ethics, code of conduct. You have to make sure that the stories that you tell are within the public interest. You can't do things such as phone tapping. That's unethical. There's actually quite a few, but I'll try and keep it as short as possible. There's, the code of conduct, the code of ethics that essentially tell you how to be a journalist and tell you what kind of journalist that you should be. You should ideally be a journalist that is reporting stories in the public interest. And what was the second question?
It was, what is outside your remit?
Outside of my remit, there's probably nothing outside of my remit at the moment, but if I worked for a newspaper and a magazine, I know there's certain things I probably can and can't say due to the nature of, I'll be representing the business. So because I represent myself, I control how my own brand is seen.
Okay, but then you have to, I guess, tweak it amongst that particular brand of that publication. I'm not saying you would say you would work for the Sun, but if it was the Sun, you would produce something that, I guess, talks in the Sun's language, versus one that if it was to produce for the Financial Times, just for example, you're producing the Financial Times' language.
So different magazines, different newspapers, yes, do have different layouts, and you work according to their layout. And for example, they have different types of readership. So an article I'd write for The Guardian would probably be very different to an article I'd write for The Sun. The Sun, the average reading age, I think if I remember correctly, is 6 years old. And The Guardian's probably got more of a left-leaning liberal audience. So yes, you would tailor your work dependent. However, a lot of the work that I do, I would like to believe I would write for The Guardian. I'm not a big fan of The Sun per se as a newspaper. I don't believe it does anything massively good for society. But the same can be argued for The Guardian, just depends on where you sit. So yeah, a lot of what I do allows me the freedom and the space to be able to work with different employers.
So what inspired you to become a freelance journalist?
I've always wanted to tell stories, to tell my own story and to tell people's stories in the world. When I grew up, one of my biggest role models was Sir Trevor McDonald from Trinidad and Tobago. He was the first ever black news anchorman on ITV. And my mum showed me a lot of his work and wanted me to realize that he came from Trinidad. We're from Trinidad, we can make it. I think she was always just trying to inspire me and to show me that another black man from Trinidad was able to make it. Because my mum had this idea that to be a black boy meant I had to work 3 times as hard. And in many ways she was right, because she came to the country and she had to work extremely hard. So he was my biggest role model. And as I got older, I realized whilst I was telling my story, there were so many other stories out there that I always wanted to be able to tell. So it was something from as young as I could remember. But also journalism allowed me to communicate in ways that I probably ordinarily wasn't able to communicate as a kid. Gave me the chance, and I believe that most importantly, the pen was my therapy in many ways, to see things and to change my perspectives and to expose different ideas to different people.
And talking about exposing different ideas to different people, what is your particular niche when you write articles? Is that mental health?
Well, that's one of them, but I'd say political and social commentary. So, speaking about how society affects mental health and how mental health affects society, or how politics affects mental health and how mental health affects politics. So, a lot of what I've written about quite recently, as an example, is my OCD journey. So, living with OCD as a mental illness. But also speaking about how we need an early intervention measures for OCD. So, reading studies and being able to condense that information and to put it out there so people are going to be able to read. I look at, for example, the ethnic minority element, how ethnic minorities are underrepresented in OCD trials. So I'm always exploring different intersections within the mental health space and seeing how it relates to our wider understanding of society.
But why did you decide to focus on those topics?
I've always been quite passionate about it. I would say when I was around 2021, I was quite strong in my political views. I believe I was quite ideologically driven. And as I got older and I was exposed to new ideas and I purposely exposed myself to new ideas, I realized when you begin to read, you know nothing at all. And I had to understand by listening to views that were very different to my own, it helped me to have what I believe to be a broader picture of society. So that's what really interested me, looking at the polarization and the division in society due to politics, and how ultimately, whilst we are a bigger community than we ever have been because social media has made the world small, I wanted to understand why we are so divided. So a lot of these topics really interest me. And just growing up, the way I grew up with a very set view of the world, and I always knew the world was bigger than the world that I grew up in, and I wanted to be exposed to that. And I believed that political social commentary was the best way to go about that.
Have you seen that? Have you noticed if your articles have changed people's perceptions or not?
Massively. So a lot of the articles I've written on in different publications, I've had many messages from people saying thank you for the article I've written and thank you for speaking about the OCD experience. Again, it's a very underrepresented and trivialized mental illness, and a lot of people don't realize that representation really does matter. I know in some assets people don't like representation, but when it comes to a black man, for example, speaking about mental health, it's huge for a lot of people. But also in the OCD community, OCD is represented almost as this white female issue, and it's not the OCD community's fault in any way, shape, or form, but you start to really have an understanding that me speaking my story and giving my story out there to the world is somebody else's healing. So a lot of people have had a massive impact from my articles, and I'm proud to say that because that's what I wanted. I wanted to tell my story to be able to give people a chance to know that they can be okay again.
Correct me if this is not the correct phrase to say this, but you have OCD.
Yes, I live with OCD, yeah.
So, can you please explain what exactly is OCD?
So OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. The best way to describe it is everyone gets intrusive thoughts. Someone with OCD has intrusive thoughts, and there's different themes that surround it. So I mainly live with harm OCD and sexual orientation OCD, which is harm OCD is the obsessive thoughts and questioning that I'll hurt myself and hurt other people. And sexual orientation is the obsessive idea that I might be gay, I might not be gay. It's anxiety. It's an anxiety disorder. And what would happen would be if you have a certain thought, which would be known as an obsession, you would perform a certain behavior, which is known as a compulsion. And that happens on an OCD cycle. So a lot of people understand OCD to be a cleaning, to do with cleaning and symmetry. So if someone has an intrusive thought with and they're clean and their themes are cleaning, they have the thought, they might perform a compulsion slash the behavior and move something and start cleaning in the hope that will alleviate the anxiety from the intrusive thought. But what happens is the window and the cycle gets smaller and smaller as time goes on because you're hoping the behavior will keep alleviating the anxiety, but it's not doing anything. It's for a short period of time. So what you have to learn to do with OCD is to accept the intrusive thoughts for what they are. The OCD thoughts are known as ego dystonic, which means they're against your morals and values. They say nothing about who you are. Everyone has intrusive thoughts. Just people with OCD, we obsess and we ruminate on those thoughts more than the average person.
And how do you manage your life with OCD?
I journal quite a lot, so I practice something which is called brain dumping, which is a CBT technique. At the end of every night, I speak about the things I'm grateful for, what's been good in my day, how my day perhaps could have gone better, what I'm looking forward to. So that puts me in an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset. I meditate as well. I go to the gym, went to the gym really early this morning. So I'm just trying to get more and more productive, conducive habits. But also as well, I used to take antidepressants. So I'm on 50 milligrams of sertraline at the moment, and I'm looking to wean myself off and come off them, because what that does is it dampens the anxiety. But I no longer believe that I need it. I've come a very long way with therapy, and I've had a great therapist that's allowed me to get better. But also, I manage it through advocacy and activism. The pain that I went through really turned into something purposeful. So,
Do you think OCD is a misunderstood mental health issue or just underrepresented?
it's both. It's a fantastic question you've asked. It's underrepresented because Black and other ethnic minority groups across the Western world suffer with OCD at very similar rates, yet it's presented mainly through a white audience. And for example, Black people that are commonly have uncommon symptoms are very often likely to be misdiagnosed as psychotic. So there's an underrepresentation element, but also, yes, it's trivialized. 89p is spent on the average OCD patient, and that totals to about 1 in 100 people in the UK, which is about 1 to 2% of the population. So 750,000 to 1 million people in the UK live with OCD. And people just don't take it seriously. They just think it's about cleaning, tapping, turning lights on, turning lights off. And that's typically because there was a show on Channel 4 in 2013 called Obsessive Compulsive Cleaners, where they presented OCD to be this adjective, this personality twerk, almost post-personality quirk, almost to be something to be desired by people. And it downplayed the torment that it can really cause in some people, some people's lives that live with OCD. So a lot of what I do is trying to get people to understand what OCD really is and how we can give people a chance in society to live with OCD.
You mentioned white eyes or white lens a lot with OCD. Do you think that plays a part in why the Black community doesn't, I guess, take OCD or mental health issues seriously for their own self, or is there a much more deeper issue?
That's one part of the issue. It's a multi-layered issue. But I'd say the biggest part that we've had to deal with is the trauma we've gone through as a people. We know that trauma literally changes the way your brain operates. There's MRI scans that show it. But a lot of right-wing commentators are in denial about how trauma works. I think another really big thing is colonization and slavery. It really affected our mental health. And for example, to be on the plantation, to live, you had to be some sort of mad. To go through what we went through, the beatings, the whippings, people really don't understand that colonization and slavery had a long-lasting legacy on people. And it's still something that we feel to this day. And I know to some people that's just a woke talking point, but people need to be honest about the way it affects the world. The banks, some of the major banks, some of the major companies were financed off the back of slavery, which gave people an unfair shot and advantage in life compared to people from a world like me and you. And colonization and slavery really affected the way we distrusted mental health institutions. If you look at the founder of modern day gynecology, John Sims, he experimented on a Black woman. Him and a couple of other professors raped her continuously. They poked and they prodded her. They treated her like a human zoo. Then you've also got the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, where you look at how the American government injected 400 African Americans with syphilis, and they could have killed them at any point, but they let them have syphilis all the way up until their death, and it killed them. There's so many different examples of atrocities done that have really affected the way we relate to mental health institutions. But I believe also the way we see mental health is we see it as a weakness in many ways, because we've had to be strong in the past, and to almost have the freedom now to be weak goes against everything we grew up with. It goes against the grain. And I don't believe it's weak to speak about your mental health. Vulnerability is a door for authenticity, and authenticity is a door to strength. And people don't realize that when you are vulnerable, you are strong. And when you speak about your struggles, it doesn't make you any weaker. And this is something I've had to unlearn myself. And I still struggle with it in some ways, but a lot of these things have deeply had a profound effect on the way we see mental health and the way we see, for example, OCD.
Do you have to disclose OCD to any potential employer or partner you work with?
I don't actually. And funnily enough, I applied for a job recently for the BBC because I want to be on the BBC Sounds Lab, turning my podcast into almost a product for people to be able to consume. And they asked the question, am I disabled? And I ticked yes, because it is a disability. OCD is classed as a disability. If you live with it for more than 12 months and it affects you and hinders you in some kind of way, that's classed as a disability. So only of recent have I been acknowledging that it is a disability. But in the past, I haven't disclosed it, but I have the freedom to disclose it or not disclose it.
Just before we move on from the OCD aspect, before we move on from how OCD affects you in your workplace, just one last question around that topic. But has your OCD ever negatively or positively impacted work relations, or colleague, or a particular partnership?
I'd say in the past, OCD has negatively affected me simply because I couldn't be around certain people because of the thoughts I was having. I was afraid that I was many different things and I was triggered by many different people. So it was more negative than it was positive. I'm not thankful for OCD, but I'm thankful for the lessons OCD has given me, in the sense of it taught me that my mental health is not a given. It's something I need to keep working towards. I believe quite often we acknowledge that mental health is something to be worked on, but we don't always know how to work on it. And the brain takes time to catch up sometimes. So when it comes to our mental health, we're finally having the conversations in society, but conversations are one thing. What's next? A lot of what I talk about is I want to do what's next. I want to move forward. I want to progress with proactive solutions. And that's a lot of what I speak about. But for the most part, OCD has been negative, and I still live with it every day. Some days I struggle a bit, but I'm grateful to be alive. But the lessons OCD have given me have been massively impactful, and it's given me a very different relationship with myself, the world, and just how I view my existence, most importantly.
How long have you been a freelance journalist, and what route did you take to become one?
So I was studying an NCTJ, which is a national qualification to become a journalist. I didn't finish it at the time because I was going through quite a lot, and I need to go back and finish it at some point. But what happened was I started it, I learned some of the skills, and as time went on, during my mental health breakdown, actually, I started deciding I want to put these skills to use, and I started writing my story, started bothering different editors, different newspapers, different magazines, and I just messaged each one of them. And that's how I restarted my freelancing writing career. But before that, I was writing for a network called the Common Sense Network, where I was just contributing weekly on a voluntary basis. It wasn't paid, speaking about different things in society. Again, politics and society. So race, gender, sex, many different things I was speaking about. So that's how I started then. But before that, actually, I was writing for a few different small publications. For example, in school, I was writing for the school newsletter, school newspaper. I was just doing small little things, bits and pieces. But as I've gotten older and I've earned money from it, which has been mainly actually last year, that's when I would say I've become a freelance journalist.
Speaking of money, as a freelance journalist, how are you paid?
So we're paid via invoice, and every different organization or newspaper or magazine, they'll have a set amount that they're paying people for a set amount of words. So let's say it's £180 for a 1,000 word piece. That's how you'd be paid. And you would invoice them, you'd send it off, and they'll pay it within a certain time period. So you are in control of how much you earn, when you're going to get it as well, based on the law, and also who will be paying you.
How do you get noticed by publications? Do you reach out to them, or do you promote yourself via some sort of platform or affiliate marketing based situation?
So both. I use Instagram a lot to promote a lot of what I do. Social media is a powerful tool and mechanism. Social media is essentially your online portfolio. On top of that, what I'll do is I'd email them, bother them on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All these different platforms is where I'd bother people, and I'll pitch an article or pitch an idea and see if they would want to hear it. So that's typically how it works. So a lot of it is you have to work off your own back to get opportunities. Some people can get opportunities handed to them depending on the platform you have and so much more. I'm to that degree in some aspect, but if I want to get more work, ideally I need to keep putting myself out there a lot more.
And do these publications, do they also pay for any expenses that is incurred during your contract with them?
No, well, there's no real contract. Well, some I've had to sign a contract for, but for the most part, your pay is typically the work. You don't really get paid any other expenses because you're freelance. You're not entitled to employees' benefits. For example, let's say if I was a journalist and I probably worked for ITV News and I had to go to Cardiff and I was based in the UK, they probably would pay for that because I'm working for ITV as the entity, rather than if I'm working for myself, I need to get to these places off my own back.
So, just to give a summarization, what is the benefits of a freelance versus the benefits of being just a typical journalist?
I would say the benefits, I would say, of being a freelancer, you work to the sound of your own drum, you march to your own beat. You have the freedom to write what you want when you want. Well, obviously within certain stipulations, but I would say also I'm not bound to anyone. I'm not bound by anything. To some people, which is fantastic. To other people, they like having the chance to be able to write for just one publication. You know, they probably have certain networks and certain contacts that already are as a result there. But I would say also in freelance, what I'm able to do is I'm able to write for different people, which I think expands my portfolio in a very different way compared to the conventional journalist. But obviously journalism has changed as massively as an industry, so there's different types of journalism. But I would say, yeah, for the most part, those are the differences from that I would simplify to someone, that I would explain simply to someone between a freelance journalist and a conventional journalist.
Just catching the point where you said journalism has changed. What do you mean by that exactly? Is it that the rise of podcasts, or is that something else?
So there's different forms of media, there's different medium formats now that allow people to consume information. I believe that the news is no longer the only place where people get information. Once upon a time ago, the news was pretty much the most trusted source on the internet, but due to the advent of fake news and so much more, people are questioning the media at a much higher rate than it's ever been. And when we look at what social media has done, people are able to now be journalists in their own right. Civic journalism is what it's called, where you take your phone, you can record things, you can say your own narrative, you can create your own narrative, and you can push it out on social media, and people have seen it even before the news sometimes even has a chance to report it. So journalism is no longer as trusted as it once was, but I still believe it's a very important element in the world. We need independent journalists who really want to bring stories to light.
Do you think that's dangerous, the fact that anybody can become a journalist? 'Cause since there's no, I guess, checks that a actual qualified journalist would have to go through.
It can be definitely dangerous because a lot of people are sensationalists on the media, but that's not to say that the media isn't a sensationalist tool for propaganda at times. But yes, it can be dangerous, and this is why I would like to believe that smartphones are smarter than people, obviously, but what people don't realize is if it wasn't for civic journalism, we wouldn't know about many different things that have happened in the world, such as Syria, Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, the Sarah Everard killing, all these different things have been pushed forward because of social media and because people are able to be journalists in the sense of they can show a video and say, this is what's happening here, this is what's going on. It can hit the mainstream news. So I think it's a good thing to some degree, but I believe like everything, there must be a balance between the good and the bad. And I would like to believe with more and more of us coming out there, more and more of us questioning, there's starting to be that balance between the good and bad, which is getting closer towards a mid ground.
You mentioned the punishments for journalists, but what are there any awards or recognitions for journalists?
Yeah, there are quite a few awards for journalists. I don't know all of them actually. I haven't really looked into it. I would like to believe that as I progress more with my work and my portfolio, people will then see out there. Maybe awards will be given to me, but at the moment, I'm not really seeking awards. But yes, there are. I think like any industry, there's a lot of awards that can be won, which increase your profile, increase the recognition you're given, and probably ultimately can lead you to bigger and better jobs within journalism, and can probably interview more people, cover even hotter topics and hotter stories. So yeah.
When you write for a publication, how does that setup work? To give you an idea, you write it and it goes through some sort of editing process?
Yeah, so for example, when I've pitched my story to newspapers, what I did was I would write a pitch and the subject line would be pitch and I'd write the title and I'd explain why I should write this piece, what this piece will be about and why it should be in their publication. So you're basically trying to sell the idea to somebody. And yes, some people will message you and be like, hey, we want you to write this because we believe you'll be good for this. But typically I do the reaching out. And because I'm doing the reaching out, I'm having to really sell this idea to them and get them to understand why they should take this on. So yeah, when I reached out to the BBC, I emailed them, they asked for an interview and I spoke my story and I went on their podcast. I was featured in an article as well. Again, different articles in different publications, but I've typically pitched the idea. I've said to them, here, this is my idea. Would you like to take this on? Would you be interested in it?
So when you do write the article, do they just publish as is, or does it go through a quality control
It
check?
always has to go through quality control and fact checking, quite usually. And what I would be able to do from that would be I would do my own editing and fact checking, but they would also do it on their part as well because they can't put out information out there that isn't true. So it's almost two steps before it even gets to go out there. So it goes through a strong process. But obviously, everyone makes mistakes. There's even recently, Beyonce and Viola Davis were confused on BBC News, where they put up a picture of Viola Davis instead of Beyonce. So I'd like to believe whoever's on the other end of the thing, they can actually do their job.
So then, what is the best story you ever wrote, or your favorite piece of your favorite piece you wrote?
I'll say my favorite and most influential and pivotal piece was my own story. By sharing my story, I shared so much of my pain and I repurposed it, but also sharing my story half the burden for somebody else out there. Because someone else, people have been able to reach out to me and said, I've read your story, Shaun. I understand I've got OCD or I've been through the exact same thing, whether it's been grief and so on and trauma. That would probably be my biggest and proudest piece today, my own personal story, putting it out there for the world to consume, for people to judge and to give other people a light when they feel like they're not being represented with any sort of mental illness. That's my proudest piece to date, I would have to say, by a long shot.
Have you ever turned down offers from publications?
Yeah, I've turned down things from places where I feel like they don't align with my morals and values, and where I believe and I can tell their style of writing is not per se my style of writing. I like to keep authenticity and transparency in a lot of my work. That's something that's very important to me. I would like to believe anyone who reads my work and has read my work knows that's something Shaun would say in real life, or this is how Shaun talks, not somewhere trying to take my character and my personality out of the work I'm doing. So it's really important for me to work with places where I know I'm going to have the freedom and the creative expression to really put something out there that I believe in. So yes, I have turned down publications.
Have you ever had situations where you was willing to work with a publication, you pitched, and then you've met them, and then you're like, oh, we don't align really as much as I thought we did here?
Yes, actually, there's a few charities I've wanted to write for, and when I did more and more research, deeper and deeper into things, I realized they were no longer places I wanted to align with. And it's because I had the conversation, so I was able to ask certain questions because there's only so much research you can do online. Obviously, I can't name the charity simply for libel purposes and defamation. I don't want either of us to go to court because I don't think either of us could afford it. But yeah, I've definitely turned down things based on when I've actually met them and had conversations. I've gone, after careful consideration, I don't believe that we would be the right suit, but I hope we can work again sometime in the future.
So this is aimed at all the aspiring journalists. For someone who wishes to become a journalist or a freelance journalist, well, let's say freelance journalist, what things do you think they need to consider before they enter that realm?
Why are you doing journalism? Are you able to create a sustainable life on a freelance budget? Because freelance work can be feast and famine. It can be stuck between the two. So you've got to make sure you know why you're doing what you're doing. Have it set out the places you would like to write for. Probably research, look at the topics you want to write on, how you're going to get there. Make sure you do your research. But also, most importantly, if you can get the qualification, you don't have to. The world's changing. Now people are being afforded opportunities outside of just the educational path, but know why you're doing what you're doing. And I say that for anybody in any profession, because if you get into something and you have no real incentive or you don't have a why you're doing it, it can be very easy to fall out of it when you fall out of love with it, maybe. You never know. And I think when you've got a true love for something, you really want to be in it. So know why you're doing what you are doing. That is something I would recommend to anybody who wants to be a journalist and anybody who wants to be in any sort of industry. Don't go into something that you don't love unless you really have to, unless you've got to sacrifice it. But have another goal in mind. Let it be a stepping stone to something you really love and that aligns with you.
How long do you see yourself being a freelance journalist for?
Probably for the rest of my life. So freelance journalism is just one element. As I said, I'm multidisciplinary, but I would like to believe I could be a journalist for the rest of my life.
Okay. One last question, probably the most important question out of all the questions I'll ask you. What song would you like to include in our playlist?
Rema, Holiday, and Reason. Those are his 2 new tunes. Those are bangers actually right now. Or We Can't Done by Popka and Drake.
You got to choose one.
No, do you know what? Open Arms by SZA and Travis Scott.
Okay.
That's my banger right now. That's the one that has to go in someone's playlist. I like my soft, gentle music.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shaun Flores. I'm a freelance journalist, creative, podcaster, political and social commentator, a multidisciplinary artist. And I've just featured on Osani TV.
Osani TV, it is a wrap.